Welcome to the Need to Know podcast from the Wilson Center, a podcast for policymakers available to everyone. Always informative, nonpartisan, and relevant, we go beyond the headlines to understand the trend lines in foreign policy. Welcome back to another episode of Need to Know. I'm your host, John Milewski. Need to Know is brought to you by the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars. The center is congressionally chartered, scholarship-driven, and fiercely nonpartisan. This week, we present the third in our series of virtual briefings for the new Congress and administration, and this time our focus is on the Indo-Pacific. My guest is the director of the Wilson Center's Indo-Pacific program, Shihoko Goto. Hello, Shihoko. Welcome back to Need to Know.
It's so great to be here. Thank you, John.
So before we dig into some specific, Shihoko, can you provide us with just an overview statement on the current status of regional relations? I know it's a broad swath to talk about, but where does the U.S. stand currently?
Okay. So in a nutshell, it can be defined as U.S. concerns about losing its place in the region. Remember that the Indo-Pacific is the most populous, the most dynamic region in the world. There are many vested interests from the U.S. into the region, economic and from a security perspective. But at the same time, this is a region that is facing a great deal of uncertainty, just like there are many uncertainties in the rest of the world. But what makes the Indo-Pacific unique is, like, one, the opportunities that it provides, and two, that it is a systemic challenge. It is not just a region that the United States could potentially be losing ground. It is also an area where other major players, including China, but also Russia, are staking a bigger claim as well.
What, if you had to come up with the short list of the key allies that are most critical to U.S. interests, who's on that list?
Right. So if we're looking at it from the U.S. interest in the region perspective, who are America's friends? The biggest one, first and foremost, is Japan, followed by South Korea. The others would include, by various degrees, Singapore, Philippines. And then we start getting a little bit more on shaky ground. Let me also add that one of the key interests of the United States in the region is Taiwan. And so although Taiwan is a strong ally of the United States, Taiwan is in most need of U.S. engagement in the region as well.
And when you look at the region as a whole, and if we were coming up with a score sheet for stability, threats, challenges, what comes to mind?
Right. So in terms of governance, I would argue that the most stable, even though there are issues right now in the South Korean government, the stability comes from Northeast Asia, and the biggest partnerships in terms of economic and security relations also come from Northeast Asia as well. And I should also add that Australia is a big partner for the United States in this region as well. The biggest concerns, the competition for hearts and minds, is in Southeast and South Asia. So,
when you were just in India, correct?
Yes.
Yeah, and some fascinating things. I want to ask you about a couple of them. One is just something you haven't talked about, at least to me, is what's the level of interest or concern, or however you would characterize it, in the changeover in American government?
Okay. So the world is watching how the new Trump administration will reshape U.S. foreign policy. And let me make one thing very clear. Across the Indo-Pacific, America's biggest allies and partners are looking for continued U.S. engagement and commitment in the region. But at the same time, they are concerned that the United States is not going to be able to deliver on some of its commitments, some of its promises, and that it is being pulled in many directions. As I said, under Trump, in his first administration, what he brought to the table was a rethinking of how the world sees the China challenge. That view of taking a more hawkish position with China has continued with both from the Trump administration to the Biden administration. We're expecting that to continue in the new Trump 2 administration as well. But at the same time, what we are concerned about is that the United States won't be able to engage. And so they are coming up with contingency plans. What if the United States is not there? Can the middle powers of the region deliver in sharing their own interests and their own concerns without the United States and also not depending on China as well?
You know, whenever we have these conversations, I'm haunted by this notion that's been around for decades of the pivot to the Pacific, right? And what you're telling me now is whatever good intentions are in that regard, there are things like the Gaza-Israel war or the threat of Iran or Russia's invasion of Ukraine, which keep pulling us in a different direction. Is that where those concerns come in about whether or not the U.S. can deliver on its promises because it's engaged elsewhere?
Yeah, so the top priorities in terms of dealing with immediate concerns, the big fires that are going on in the world right now for the incoming Trump administration, will be to deal with Ukraine and dealing with Russia, stabilizing the Middle East as well. But from America's longer term interests, the strategic competition comes from China. The opportunities are in the Indo-Pacific. So the region that is the most important for the United States in the longer term will be in the Indo-Pacific. The thing is that the United States needs to continue to invest and to maintain relationships because it cannot do so alone. Right?
Yeah.
It is being pulled in many directions. Its budget is strapped, and so it does need to work more closely with its allies and partners for practical reasons, if nothing else.
In parts 1 and 2 of this series, we spoke to our colleagues in the Mexico Institute and in the Kissinger Institute, Robert and Leila, and Trump's threat of tariffs loomed large in those discussions as we look ahead. What are the concerns regionally, particularly in the case of China, of a new round of tariffs?
Right. So if I can step back a little bit, we are seeing a rethink about globalization, per se, that unfettered, completely open rules of trade need to be reconsidered. I think that's the approach that the United States is taking, but it's also an approach that other countries, other advanced economies in the region, and also in Europe, are taking as well. We are seeing not only tariffs come in, we are also seeing greater industrial policy and other measures for greater protectionism. And so now the Trump administration is talking about imposing greater tariffs on both China as well as on its allies and partners, Canada and Mexico, right? And so there is a great deal of concern, both here in the United States about costs going up. There is also a lot of concern about the cost of doing business with the United States in the region as well. It's going to, so the good thing from a US perspective is that we're going to see more investments from Asia coming into the United States. So they could be not slapped with those tariffs. But on the other hand, we're also going to see more investments going into the region to avert the United States and its tariffs as well.
So the recent upheaval in South Korea, an hour or two of martial law declared by President Yoon, and the whole fiasco that's blown up in his face, where now his presidency is on life support. How does that, since it's one of those key allies in the region for the U.S., how does that affect the equilibrium?
Right. So the question about President Yoon, as we speak today, is whether he's going to be impeached or whether he's going to resign. So that's a domestic Korean issue. From a U.S. perspective, there is, so long as there is uncertainty about who is leading South Korea, that is the source of great anxiety to the United States. But I would also caution this. The United States, the Biden administration had been a great proponent of President Yoon and his administration. And President Yoon had been lauded in Washington and across the world for his commitment to engage more with the United States, to reach out more to Japan, to have more closer coordination with the international community writ large. We are seeing, though, that the president who had been lauded by the US government is now facing considerable challenges, and he declared martial law, and he's on the cusp of being booted out or leaving on his own free will. All this to say that the lesson to be learned from the United States should be that Washington needs to be careful about putting too much commitment into one leader or one particular political party in any country or any government. It has favorites in the Philippines. It has favorite political party in Japan. It has favorites in Taiwan and the like. We need to be able to work with any government that is in play in the region. And we need to have a true partnership with this country.
Yeah, I mean, that makes so much sense, right? Because if a favorite goes down that the U.S. is attached at the hip to, the U.S. goes down as far as favorability with that individual as well. It's one thing to pick favorites when you're talking about despots, right, and dictatorships, when you're siding with the opposition. But in a democratically elected system, to choose sides, as you said, has some problems attached to it.
Right. So yesterday's darling, the Democratic leader, could it potentially be tomorrow's despot, right? Like,
there you go.
Yeah.
So before we close, I want to ask you to provide us with a preview of this new publication you have. As you know, need to know, our main audience are policymakers on Capitol Hill and elsewhere, members. We hope to give them some information that they can work with. And you have a publication coming out that can do just that. Can you tell us about that?
Yes, it's entitled Hitting the Reset Button in the Indo-Pacific. And in a nutshell, it is about some of the lost opportunities of the United States to change the equation in the region. And so the United States has been, over the past decade, trying to ensure that it remains the leading power in the region, and also to keep the authoritarian rule of China at bay as well. But instead of seeing success in meeting the China challenge, we've seen a China that has become stronger. Its economy is on shaky ground now, but its ambitions and its influence, especially in the global south, is tremendous. We believe, this paper argues, that we have an opportunity with the new US administration to reassess what the United States' Indo-Pacific strategy should be. That, yes, we do need to focus on the China challenge, but two, more importantly, we do need to work with our allies and partners in the region to achieve those goals, because we have not been as successful as we could be over the past decade.
A final thought on that is, sort of, I'm thinking in terms of triage. If we had the ear of the president-elect or of new members of Congress who will be coming in to play in this equation, where are the areas where they should focus their attention most immediately?
So America has friends in the region. It has the most number of treaty allies in the region as well. China has none. There is a great deal of goodwill in the region towards the region. There is a great deal of uncertainty too. There are, if you are as you said, I was in India, there's a great deal of concern about what the new US administration may or may not do in the region. But there is a lot of expectations and high hopes. America needs to capitalize on that and deliver on those expectations, not because it's an altruistic thing to do, but because it is also in the U.S. interest as well.
Okay, we'll end it there. There'll be more to talk about in the future, but Shihoko, thank you very much. And I want to tell our viewers and listeners, if you'd like to learn more about the region and about the work of the Indo-Pacific program, come to the Wilson Center website. At the top of the screen, you'll see a programs tab, and you can find your way to all of the good work from Shihoko and her colleagues. We hope you enjoyed this edition of Need to Know, and that you'll join us again soon. Until then, for all of us at the Center, I'm John Milewski, thanking you for your time and interest. See you next time.